All right. Well, good morning, everybody from around the state. Good as always to be back in community with you. We'll let folks stream in while I slowly get us kicked off here. I want to welcome you to our 42nd meeting of the Local Energy Resources Network. I'm Angie Hacker, Statewide Best Practices Coordinator with the California Climate and Energy Collaborative. We're back again, and I have to tell you, this 2025 is a year where I find myself always surprised when I join this monthly meeting about what we're enduring while trying to continue to make progress on our local energy and climate initiatives. And I just wanted to recognize our friends and colleagues in LA today and across California who, again, are finding themselves managing some crises and who continue to lead with bravery on many fronts, including in energy and climate. So, I just tell you that while folks are still streaming in, we're working at SEEK really hard on writing up our regional landscape analysis and our 2025 SLEEP report, these things that we're compiling with your input following the Catalyst convenings that we held in LA and San Diego. We're preparing for the SEEK forum, reading all your proposals, and I just want to tell you from my statewide and old-timer perspective that you all are really just exceptionally innovative, determined, and resilient. This network of folks in our network are just navigating these times with resourcefulness, and I love to see your unwavering commitment to inclusion and compassion in your work. So I just want to encourage you all to introduce yourself in the chat as we get going here. Please feel free to share any words of encouragement for your fellow colleagues here around the state, and welcome. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive in. Like you, we're marching on and remain committed and working to help you access opportunities to help you keep it on with your local energy and climate goals, which is what we do here at LERN. And as we have for the last few months, sometimes we're going to bring to your attention some underlying policy movements that could affect your energy and climate funding prospects. So today, our featured topic, we have several guest speakers for. They're going to help us try to explain changes that is happening to California's cap and trade funded greenhouse gas reduction fund and how those changes have been proposed in the state's budget, which legislators are considering this week, of all weeks, among all the other things happening. So first, we'll do what we always do. We're going to run through timely opportunities and a couple of brief spotlights from a couple of agency friends from CARB and the Governor's Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into our opportunity roundtable. This is my hyperlink cheat sheet. This is our timely opportunities we want you to be aware of. You're going to get access to all of this. There'll be links in the chat. There'll be materials emailed afterwards, so you don't have to worry too much about trying to stress or take notes. And I also want to encourage folks, because this is a roundtable, to include any of the opportunities that you are aware of in your neck of the woods. It could be funding, assistance, or input opportunities that folks like you around the state could take advantage of. And in particular, I find it difficult to really understand where the philanthropic opportunities are. So if you know of those, like, we definitely want to be hearing about that. I do want to spend a second on the left there, the policies that are driving investment. So like I said, these underlying policies are going to, they down the line will eventually become or not become a place-based funding or assistance opportunity. You're aware that the state and federal budgets are in progress right now, marching towards adoption probably in the summer. We're going to spend time on the California May Revise in our featured discussion. So that's why it's blue. It's sort of like we're going to put a pin in that for just a moment. The federal bill passed by the House last month. We talked a little bit about it. It's in the Senate's hand at the moment. It could be modified. We really don't know a lot of updates yet. I do know that there's a lot of proponents of clean energy and climate investments that are hoping to see reinvestment in things like FEMA and NOAA and USGS and a lot of other agencies, and advocating for the continuation of tax credits. But as it stands right now, the proposed cuts include $336 billion in clean energy tax credits. And there's this interesting provision I know a lot of you are talking about that would require construction on large scale clean energy projects to begin within 60 days to retain access to the tax credit. There's also almost $200 billion reduction for efforts to adopt EVs. So, the EV tax credits are getting a lot of attention right now, but we're just still waiting to see what Senate will do. They're aiming to pass their version of the bill by early July and wrap up the process within the House before the August recess. They'll need to pass a reconciliation bill by September 30th, which is the last day of the fiscal year under the current budget resolution. That's what they're required to do. So that's just a quick key policy update. And what I want to do here is actually to highlight a few opportunities. So opportunities still continue to be available. So one of them is coming from CARB, and these are our friends from the Sustainable Transportation and Communities division. And so there is a program available now. It's actually more like an RFP, Sustainable Transportation and Communities Projects. They're seeking brief pre-proposals by July 14th from California State University and University of California academics. So I know that's not a lot of you, but a lot of you are partnering with these organizations, and maybe there is, I know they're looking for multidisciplinary teams. 6 projects that they're trying to fund will fill important data, information, and research gaps to support the division's programs related to sustainable transportation, land use, housing, and buildings. So stuff that you all are really working on. This may be research to inform the programs that will eventually maybe be created. So things like wildfire recovery, we're talking about enhancing methods to measure climate benefits of ag land conservation. So this one's interesting, site visits to understand real world experience with building decarbonization. And then there's another one, effects of zero emission regulation on housing affordability and rental costs. So I think there's some stuff in there y'all are interested in. If you have academic partners, you may want to talk. Okay, another one I wanted to bring to your attention is federal Department of Transportation. This is a low or no emission grant program, and the grants for buses and bus facility competitive grant programs. So this one also is due July 14th. Local governments and tribal governments are eligible. It's got 2 tracks. There's one called low or no emission grant program for $1.1 billion. These are competitive grants. Eligible activities for that one include capital projects to purchase or lease zero emission or low emission transit buses and acquire, construct, rehabilitate, and lease required supporting facilities such as recharging, refueling, and maintenance facilities. So that's one, and that's got the most money, $1.1 billion. And then there's a smaller one, a smaller track for grants for buses and bus facility programs, almost $400 million in competitive grants. Activities include capital projects to purchase, lease, or rehabilitate buses and related equipment, and acquire, construct, lease, or rehabilitate bus-related facilities. So for those of you managing those types of infrastructure and facilities and fleets, then that might be something you're interested in, or pass it along to your transit folk. Okay, I'm going to keep trucking along. There's one here that if I drop it under other assistance, it usually means it's not really for community serving organizations, local governments like you, but it's for your constituents. It might be a program direct, in this case to the commercial sector. So the California Energy Commission, and really they're the ones primarily to watch for funding opportunities right now. They have a program called Energized Commercial Vehicles. And so this is intended to provide incentives for zero emission vehicle infrastructure equipment for medium and heavy duty battery, electric, and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles operated in California. And so you could be a California city or county government, transportation district, or transit district, or a public agency. There's $544 million for this funding lane. So this fast track 2025 funding lane is consolidating several funding sources into one, and it's offering incentives for electric vehicle charging and or hydrogen refueling infrastructure equipment to support medium duty and heavy duty zero emission vehicles. And who knows, maybe our friends that are here from CARB Advanced Fleets have anything to tell us about it. But that one, like I said, more available to your commercial sector, and looks like it's due July 15th. Okay, and then I just want to give you a heads up that there's a couple of things pending that I'm tracking. So we're going to hear from LCI, Governor Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation, about some of their extreme heat initiatives in a minute, but there is a round 2 coming for their extreme heat and community resilience grant program. There's also movement in the CPUC's SGIP, Self-Generation Improvement program that I know some of you are tracking, and maybe we can bring a speaker next time. And also, if you're tracking the California Solar for All program, there is an interesting piece in there that's relatively small, but for the EDD agency on a workforce program that will end up becoming a grant opportunity. So more to come. There are some input opportunities. I'm going to save these last two for at the end of the meeting. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the SEEK updates, but there are things to register for, and I want to tell you because we're all going to get together next month in July at our SEEK forum, and there's some adjacent things we'd like for you to also come to if you can. Okay, so that's the rundown. If you added anything else into the chat, we appreciate it. We are all helping each other access the funding opportunities that remain available. And with that, we're going to turn our attention over to a couple of spotlights. So we have two guests that are going to give short presentations because they wanted to get some information out in front of you that they think you will appreciate. First, I would like to hand off to Andrew Reyes. He's our friend over at CARB. There's a Clean Fleet event he wants to tell you about, and then I'm going to hand it off to Catherine Foster, who's going to talk to us about some extreme heat initiatives. So let's go to you first, Andrew.
Thanks, Angie. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Oh, okay. So I'm Andrew Reyes. I'm with the California Air Resources Board. I just want to invite everyone to a zero emission truck and off-road showcase and ride and drive event that we're sponsoring with CalStart on June 18th at Angel Stadium in Anaheim, California. It'll be a great opportunity for you to become familiar with various zero emission technologies and see the newest zero emission vehicles on the market. We'll have a large variety of vehicles commonly used by government fleets, including pickup trucks, work trucks, box trucks, and more for you to test drive and learn about. Manufacturer representatives will be on site to answer your questions. Our last event in Pomona featured over 70 Class 2B to 8 trucks, buses, vans, and off-road equipment. We'll also be there hosting a booth dedicated to assisting state and local government fleets. We'll be on hand to answer any questions you may have about various programs, everything from advanced clean fleets to clean truck check and off-road diesel. We'll also be providing information about current incentive opportunities and resources, such as the Technical Assistance Program, Cal Fleet Advisor, that can help your fleet move towards zero emissions. So that's it. Thank you, Angie.
All right, thanks, Andrew. So good one, especially if you're in Southern California and you're working on clean fleets. So thanks for always keeping us abreast, Andrew. Let's go to our next slide, and we'll bring up our friend, Catherine Foster, who PS used to be with CivicWell. So she's now at the Governor's Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation to tell us about some extreme heat initiatives.
Thank you so much, Angie. The first note, not necessarily connected to the Extreme Heat Action Plan, but what Angie shared about the Round 2 Extreme Heat and Community Resilience Program. Round 2 is coming out in fall, more or less, currently slated for $22.5 million. We'll provide some more updates as they become available. But the other engagement opportunity I wanted to highlight is our work on the Extreme Heat Action Plan. So this is SB 306. We're required to update it every 3 years. The next update is due July 1st, 2026. Within the next 13 months, more or less, LCI will be conducting a series of engagement activities throughout the summer and into the fall on the update, getting feedback from our state agencies on what extreme heat work has been done in the last 3 years, what community would like to see in the action plan moving forward, and how we can take the Extreme Heat Action Plan at the state level and narrow it down to the local and regional planning efforts as well. So if you're interested in getting involved, I can drop the listserv link in the chat, and there'll be more opportunities shared throughout our social media as well. Next slide. The other opportunity we have to share is we have a partnership with OEHA, the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, or agency. We're supporting their Cal Heat Score development. This is AB 2238. It's a heat scoring system, essentially, where folks can go onto a website, look at extreme heat indices across the state, narrow down on a specific zip code, and see how extreme heat is impacting heat vulnerable communities. As part of the development effort for this score, we're launching a series of cohorts around heat vulnerable populations, specifically focused on tribes and indigenous people, outdoor and warehouse workers, and elderly people, Essentially, it'll be a series of 3 different meetings throughout the summer and fall to gain input from these communities on the score. It is paid at $100 an hour, up to $600 more or less. And we welcome any interest in this. We're having informational sessions on July 16th. So I'm happy to share more information on that as well. And I think Angie is going to share the registration details in the notes. Thanks, everyone.
That's right. We'll certainly share information. In fact, we might get a little sneak preview if we can at one of these adjacent events around our SEEK forum later. So thanks, Catherine, for sharing that information. I know a lot of you work on both sides, mitigation and resilience. Let's go ahead. And if you have questions for Andrew or Catherine, I think they'll hang around for a few minutes and they can enter those in the chat. Okay. Well, if we're nothing but if not efficient, we are moving quickly and we have a lot to discuss, and it's about to become an even greater fire hose. We have 4 speakers that are going to help us with this next topic. So our featured discussion today is going to examine the implications of potential changes to California's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is in the budget that was proposed by Governor Newsom and the May revise. Say it's tricky. This topic and lots of topics tricky right now. And some of us in this network may find ourselves at odds, perhaps, with some of the energy and climate policies that we're seeing coming out of the state at a time when we're managing a sea of unprecedented threats. But this one is an important one. I wanted to raise it for you because I know there's a lot going on, and I'm not sure everybody's kind of paying attention to this one. But if you're me and you're looking at funding opportunities from a big kind of landscape perspective, we're losing a lot at the federal level. There's challenges to the $2 billion, sort of what used to be a very reliable EE budget. And there's threats also now to the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, at least in terms of the way it is being spent. So I wanted to raise it for you because it could have implications for your future climate funding here in California that is available to place-based initiatives like yours. I'm not going to speak too much about this. I'm going to leave it to my esteemed panel to really tell you what's going on, what's been proposed, and what those implications might be. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce them one by one. I have a question for each of them. They're going to take each about 5 minutes to respond, and then we're going to go to some questions that I have for them as a panel, and then we'll go to you. So make sure as we're talking, thinking about questions you have, drop those in the chat, and we'll get to those when we're done with the initial discussion, okay? Okay, so let's go ahead to the next slide. Our first speaker is Jeff Neal. He's the senior legislative advocate for a law firm, and he's got 20 years of experience in or around state politics as an advocate for public agencies, working a variety of capacities. He used to work for CSAC and the California Special Districts Association, and he works for lots of local agencies. So we'll start with you, Jeff. And the question that I posed to Jeff was, what is GGRF? What's the latest legislative status and trajectory? And so tell us a little bit about what is happening. What's the status legislatively right now?
Thanks, Angie. Appreciate it. Appreciate the invitation to speak today, and thanks for bringing us all together for these meetings. As Angie said, I represent local agencies here at Nielsen-Merximer County, cities, special districts. And so in terms of what the GGRF is, and I think I'll do a little bit of budget process 101 as well, just to kind of explain where we are with it. You know, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, it comes from the auction revenues, right? And it's about $4 billion a year, although the most recent auction was a bit lackluster, and it provides all of that money, at least in theory, goes to activities that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. There are sort of 3 chunks of money within GGRF. There's the high-speed rail money, just sort of carved out on its own. There are other continuous appropriations, amounts that are where statute says we're going to spend this many dollars or this percent of greenhouse gas reduction funds on these activities. And those are things, a lot of that money has gone to transit. It's gone to affordable housing, sustainable communities as really the biggest chunk of it. And then there are all of the discretionary items that the legislature determines every year, and they can change those in the budget. And those have gone to things like low carbon transportation and air quality, forest health, you know, agriculture, sort of preservation, keeping cities from sprawling too far, all things that directly or indirectly reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So really, it's a huge amount of money every year for these purposes, coming from, you know, the auctions for companies and activities that release greenhouse gases. So it has to be reauthorized every several years. It sunsets so that the governor and the legislature can kind of take a fresh look at it. That's coming up in a couple years, but there was talk going back to at least late last year and then early this year that there would be a reauthorization early, probably partly because the governor wants to do it under his watch before he is no longer the governor. And maybe also just to make sure it happens on time, because these negotiations can be protracted sometimes. Sometimes there's also a benefit to doing difficult votes to the extent it might be difficult when it's not an election year. So the governor so in terms of the budget process, right, the governor proposes a budget plan in January, revises it in May after it's a clearer picture for what the state's revenues for the year will be. The legislature has to pass something by June 15th in order to keep getting paid to meet that constitutional deadline. And then in general, the governor will sign a budget before the fiscal year begins on July 1st. But they can and do, the legislature and the governor, pass amendments to the budget bill, often called Budget Bill Junior, after that. And they can do that anytime through the end of session, or even in special session, which we might end up getting this year. So there's the budget bill, which appropriates all the funding, but then there are also a whole host of other bills that pass with the budget, which are called budget trailer bills. And these are the bills that make statutory changes related to the budget, or statutory changes necessary to, you know, change the budget amounts that they have. So you'll recall all of the continuously appropriated funds under GGRF, those are all in statute. They can change the statutes, they just need to do it in a bill that changes the statutes. All the continuous appropriations, you know, are changed really just in the budget bill itself, not in statute. So, you know, the reauthorization does not have to get done on the budget timeline. They have a couple of years that they need to do it. Also, the reauthorization doesn't have to happen at the same time as the spending plan. They can do, they're related obviously, but they are separate. However, the governor proposed this year using $1.5 billion, essentially taking all of the discretionary funding and not spending it on the programs that they have been spending it on. The agriculture, the air quality, low carbon transportation, forest health measures, and instead using that money to fund CAL FIRE. Now, arguably, CAL FIRE has, you know, certainly their job has been made more difficult and more expensive as a result of climate change and the way that fires burn now, bigger fires, faster fires, et cetera. And CAL FIRE does do some work that could that increases forest health and might reduce carbon emissions from fires. However, this was a pretty controversial proposal. Late breaking news. So the legislature came to an agreement on at least their response to the governor yesterday. The budget bills went in print in the middle of the night last night. AB 101 and SB 101. One was at something like 2:37 in the morning, and I think the other one was 5:30 in the morning. Those need to be in print for 72 hours before they can be not voted on, but before they can achieve final passage by each house. So they could vote on a budget as early as Friday. This is not an agreement with the governor. It is an agreement between the two houses of the legislature, but by passing it, the legislature is meeting their June 15th deadline. So the rumors before they got the budget bill in print this quickly were that they would be coming back Sunday on Father's Day to vote on this Sunday evening. That is June 15th. It would meet their constitutional deadline. In this deal, what the legislature is proposing to do is not accept the governor's entire $1.5 billion, sweeping the entire annual appropriations part of GGRF, but they are approving part of it, $1 billion across 2 years. So it'd be $500 million in 2 years. I have not seen the language yet. I don't know whether that is this year and next year, or whether it is next year and the following year. Either way, it's $1 billion out of the continuous appropriation. Technically, as the LAO pointed out, the GGRF revenues, the auction revenues are a tax. They are not a fee, so they can be used in theory for anything. So this is them doing that. It would still, better than the governor's proposal for our purposes, it would still leave a fair amount of money to be continuously or annually appropriated. But the other thing is that the conversation is still to be had on the high-speed rail, which is a huge chunk of funding, $1 billion to $1.25 billion. And as I mentioned, they can change any of the continuous appropriations as long as they change statute to do it. I run past my time, but just the one last note, the other piece that's playing into this year is the federal budget, of course, huge threats to California's state budget from the federal government, mostly in the Medi-Cal area, but other areas as well. And because of the federal budget timeline, while the legislature can pass bills through September 14th in the regular session, there have been a lot of rumors that they might come back in a special session if the federal government changes don't take effect until early to mid-September. The governor might call them into special session to make additional changes to the budget after their usual odd year deadline of September 14th. There's a lot of information in a short period of time, but not as short a period of time as it was supposed to be. Apologies for that, but happy to take any question.
Jeff, thank you so much. We appreciate your legislative expertise and the late-breaking update, which I was not aware of. So thank you. Folks, please do enter your questions in the chat. We're going to get to those at the end. And so next I want to introduce our next speaker, and I wanted to bring a local perspective. So Steve Frisch, many of you know him. He's the president of Sierra Business Council, and he is one of the founding members. He's also somebody like you who's working on place-based local energy and climate initiatives. And the question that I posed to Steve was, why should the SEEK network and of local and other place-based initiative practitioners be paying attention to legislative changes and potential cuts to GGRF? Basically, what does all this all mean for us?
Great, thanks. And welcome to all my SEEK friends. In addition to representing Sierra Business Council, I wanted to let everyone know we're also a partner in the new Northern Rural Energy Network, which is the REN for the North Coast and the Sierra Nevada region. So a lot of this kind of interest is also interest in driving some of these resources into rural regions of the state. But I think to answer the question, why is it important to the SEEK network, we have to think long-term a little bit here and understand, to really understand it, we need to go back to the climate and energy commitments that have been made by the governor and the state legislature and envisioned in the California Climate Investment Strategy that was published by CARB. And we also have to think about the original intent of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which was that it would be invested in activities that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So, we've made commitments around these programs and around how the funding will be used over time. And many of the programs have been designed around keeping those commitments. And the governor published that as a $54 billion 4-year commitment in 2022. But of course, a lot has changed since 2022. That 2022 proposal was intended to be funded by a combination of state general fund revenue, greenhouse gas reduction fund revenue from the cap and trade program, federal contributions, and to complement the use of ratepayer funds around many of the energy efficiency programs. But as all of us that work with local government know, no commitment is really real until it's in the budget. So what has happened since 2022 is that as there have been stresses on the budget, that commitment has slipped and the amount of money actually going into meeting those commitments has changed. So when we saw budget stress in 2023, 2024, we reduced that commitment from the $54 billion down to $48 billion. We also shifted about $5 billion of that commitment from general fund to GGRF and climate bonds. So it really took up a lot of space in the GGRF program, and we spread that commitment over a 7-year period. So we've already seen significant slippage in the state's climate investment strategy implementation and in the commitment that was made by the governor and the legislature in 2022. And so here we are in 2025, and we have another year of budget uncertainty. And we also know that substantial funding anticipated from the federal government is likely not to appear this year. It was, Jeff's comment about the point that we might end up in a special session after the federal budget is passed, I think identifies the point that we very well might face another risk to how these GGRF funds are being spent in California. So as Jeff mentioned, as part of the budget fix, the governor proposed shifting $1.54 billion of CAL FIRE operational funding to the GGRF this year that would have grown to $2 billion by 2027. And that proposal actually was that this would be a somewhat permanent shift. And to create the space for that, if you look at the budget bill that was associated with it, they actually would needed to cut about $800 million of implementation funding for other CCI climate commitments. And that included things like extreme heat, intercity rail and transportation, and a number of other areas. So it's not as though that $1.54 billion shift was coming without an expense of cutting other commitments that had already been made in that climate strategy. So we think the macro problem for the SEEK members is that if the precedent is set that non-GHG emission reducing activities can be funded out of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, then it really is no different than the general fund. And funding for programs that we all care about and we need in order to meet our local climate goals will be struggled over in the legislative process every single year. We know we need to do some of that every year, but setting the precedent that the GGRF is essentially a fund that can be gone to in years of budget stress will actually mean that we'll have to defend it permanently. And there's some kind of existential risk in that. And as Jeff noted, these programs are super important at the local level. This is most of the states building decarbonization funding. It's a lot of the states' transportation funding. So the Clean Truck and Bus Voucher Program, the Low Carbon Transit Operations Program, the California Electric Homes Program. There's a whole slew of programs that our local partners rely upon that are funded out of the GGRF. So I think it's good news, as Jeff noted, that there is a somewhat compromise on the table here of funding CAL FIRE at $500 million. Jeff, as I understand it, it's $500 million this year and $500 million next year, but I'll have to go look at 101 and see what it actually says. And I think it's kind of, considering the point that the governor's proposal was relatively draconian and the joint legislative proposal is kind of, pretty substantially scaled back from that, we probably can't do a lot better than that this year because of the budget deficit. But it's not a good precedent to set, and we should be making it clear that it cannot be done continue to be done in the future. We also think it's super important that local entities get on board for reauthorizing the Cap and Invest program, largely along the lines that Barry Vesser from the Climate Center is going to talk about in a couple minutes. If there is a shift of CAL FIRE funding into the GGRF, the appropriate thing to shift is future wildfire mitigation funding, which has a direct nexus to greenhouse gas emissions reduction and to implementing the state's nature-based solution strategies. So it is already identified in the climate investments as something that would be theoretically funded out of cap and trade. So we think that that's a better route to go. And then, as Jeff noted, this isn't over this year. that we need to work on legislation to better align the GGRF revenues to the state's climate investment strategy. Hasn't really been updated as far as the continuous appropriations are concerned since they were set in 2010. There were a couple of minor adjustments to it. So, as it's reauthorized, we need to look at how do we align this funding more closely to implementing the state's climate goals and then review it on a periodic basis to make sure that it's meeting its objectives and is actually getting funding out to programs on the ground that meet that climate investment strategy. With that, I'll hand it off and look for questions in the chat. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. That was super helpful, and really appreciate your point you're making around when we tell voters we're going to invest in climate here in California, we want them to be able to trust that. Okay, so let's move to our next speaker. Again, keep your questions coming in the chat. Thank you for doing that already, guys. We're going to get to those. Our next speaker is our friend Lolly Lim. She's a program manager of climate equity at Greenlining Institute, where she studies the impact of policies and identifies solutions to equitable climate investments. So Lolly and I have been chatting about GGRF reauthorization, and then along came this May revise and potential cuts. And so I'm really interested to hear what Lolly has to say. I asked her if she could tackle this question. How would cutting GGRF for California climate investment programs impact place-based climate and equity initiatives already struggling under the federal cuts? And what do you think our audience should know about reauthorization? So thanks, Lolly.
Yeah, thanks, Angie. You can move on to the next slide. So I put together some, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm from the Greenlining Institute, Lolly, she, they pronouns. For those unfamiliar, Greenlining is a nonprofit advocacy org based in Oakland, and we are focused on policy advocacy that centers climate and economic equity. Next slide, please. So some of this was already covered by prior speakers, particularly Jeff, but wanted to give some additional grounding context on what the GGRF is. And this slide from the LAO shows how cap and trade, the GGRF funds have been utilized over the last decade or so. And you can see kind of what programs have been prioritized. So much of it, as mentioned previously, goes to high-speed rail, goes to affordable housing that is paired with transit. So housing, transit-oriented development. Funds also go to transit operations, zero emissions vehicles, wildfire mitigation, air quality protection, etc. Next slide, please. And as previously mentioned, there are a lot of different, over 100 different programs that are funded through the GGRF. So you could click that link later on after the presentation and see what types of programs are offered. And kind of sorted through the local government kind of perspective as well. And I think, next slide, please. One other thing I did want to mention that I don't think has been brought up yet is that the GGRF, there is a statutory requirement that was established via SB 535 and AB 1550 quite some time ago that a minimum of 35% of all GGRF dollars must benefit priority communities, and those are the places that are the most pollution burdened and represent low-income communities as defined by Cal Enviroscreen. So it's, the CARB does track all of that to make sure that these dollars are these projects are physically lending in and materially benefiting those places. And Angie, I think your question was, how would cutting GGRF impact climate and equity initiatives already struggling under federal cuts? So another thing that I just wanted to reiterate that I think was previously mentioned was that there are statutory requirements on the GGRF right now that determine how those dollars get allocated. So we have this pie of funding that comes through these cap and trade auction revenues, but already 65% or a little bit more than that year to year has been going to a subset of programs that are just on this list here. So it's not that many. So 25% of those dollars automatically go to high-speed rail, 20% goes to the affordable housing program, 10% transit operations, et cetera. So I think just to summarize the kind of negotiations that will be seeing happening in the next couple of weeks is reauthorizing cap and trade to determine whether we keep it or not, and it likely keep it, but determine how to change some of the mechanisms for how it operates, and then also to revisit this assemblage of programs and which ones continue to get continuous appropriations and how much funding is left over for discretionary funding. I think the challenge for climate investments over the last several years has just been that, first of all, there's not enough funding to go around, and secondly, the funding that is available for discretionary programs is not decided on. It is decided on year to year. So with the exception of these programs that receive continuous funding, there are so many other great programs like urban greening and community forestry, transformative climate communities, community solar, equitable building decarbonization that we've seen can make real tangible impacts that don't have dedicated funding reserved for them. So I think this moment is so important because all of that is we're kind of opening that up in the process of reauthorizing cap and trade to determine, will those somehow be able to receive continuous funds, or how will those programs be able to secure funding as much as possible for as long as possible? It's still sort of an open discussion. So I think, I don't know, Angie, if I answered your question, I think that, many of these, there may have been similar programs offered at the federal level that are no longer available to many local governments, and kind of thinking about trying our best to make sure that those resources are made available now through the GGRF is, I think, a way we can ensure that we try to preserve as much of those resources as possible. Next slide, please. And then I just wanted to note that in terms of what some of us advocates are doing, so Greenlining is working in coalition with many other environmental and environmental justice organizations on different components of the cap and trade reauthorization process, both thinking about reforming the mechanism itself for how the revenue gets generated, as well as what to prioritize with the GGRF spend out. And again, I think many stakeholders have different priorities for what we think those dollars should be utilized for. But among the groups that we are in coalition with, the list here is what we have publicly stated as programs that we would like to see resourced. And some of them are programs, some of them are just kind of broader buckets, like clean transportation initiatives writ large, sustainable agriculture programs writ large with some additional context. But we're advocating for these programs to receive some funding through the GGRF moving forward. And I think we can get to this later on, but if there are any groups on this call that would like to connect with us on this and this angle of advocacy, I'm happy to chat after the call.
Thank you, Lolly. I really appreciate you putting the programs on the screen, because these might be programs. I certainly recognize these programs and these agencies, and you might too. I know there's a lot of state, tribal, local, and other CBO folks that are out there that would really depend upon these programs and like to see them continue. I did drop a link to the LERN policy updates document. So if you go to page 2, that's where we're tracking some of this. You can add to it. There's things in there from other organizations that there's a lot of different opinions about how these dollars should be spent, what should be prioritized and retained. So League of Cities and other enterprise and all these other organizations have their pet programs and stuff, but mainly we want to get the message across that these are programs that you typically would have access to and may not in the future. Let's go to our last speaker and then we'll go to a discussion. So thank you so much, Lolly, for that. And then now we'll go to Barry Vesser. He's the Chief Operating Officer for the Climate Center. They just held a couple months ago a great climate policy summit where some of these issues started to come up. And I really appreciate you bringing your expertise here, Barry. The question that I had for Barry that I've asked him to answer is, how might these changes affect the broader landscape of climate investments available to communities in California? And what changes to GGRF do you think should happen as part of the reauthorization process?
Thank you,
Mary, are you?
Angie.
Okay.
Thanks to all my esteemed colleagues for their insights here. I am going to answer that question, but I'm going to do it in a little bit of a circuitous fashion. Because I want to take a step back. And the thing I really want to impress on everybody is that GGRF and cap and trade go like this. Like the way the cap and trade program is structured, the way the programs are structured has everything to do with the available amount of revenue in the GGRF pot. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what would make that pot bigger and why am I going to focus on that, mainly because of the state's current fiscal situation. So we all know the state is in a budget deficit, right now of about $12 billion. That's one of the reasons the governor made his move to divert, 1.5 billion out of GGRF to the general fund. But it's also true that that is expected to continue that deficit picture for the next 2 years. So that's not good for the state overall. It's certainly not good for climate programs. At the same time, we're looking at $250 billion of economic damages from the LA fires and a $40 billion FEMA request that is still pending with the federal government and enormous uncertainty around that. So this is a time when the state really needs to be creative about using the resources we have on the table to their maximum benefit. So that all said, what I want to start with a frame is anyone who's in Sacramento will know that the oil industry is trying to frame this debate as climate programs increasing your gas prices, that this is bad for California climate programs. Okay, EDF did a study which showed that over the life of this program, if it's extended, it will generate $55 billion of total economic growth in California. And by the way, that's also the kind of growth that we most need because it's $700 of savings for a family earning $70,000 or less annually. 200 for people earning 200K and above. So it's an economic development program. It's the exact kind of investments we need affecting local communities. So given that, what are some things we could do to the program to bring in more revenue? I think some of the program investments that Lolly's are suggesting make a lot of sense. The problem is those investments are likely to get crowded out if we don't expand the pie. So that's what I'm going to focus on. So the first thing is eliminating free allowances that subsidize the fossil fuel companies. Everybody may not be aware, but oil companies after the 2017 reauthorization were basically given a free pass. That's costing the state roughly $1 billion a year, $890 million last year, and every year it costs the state money. This is money that could be invested back into GGRF, into climate programs, or also potentially rebates. And I'll talk about rebates in just a second. Another way of putting more money back into GGRF would be through implementing what is called an emissions containment reserve. And what this simply does is, if you think of the cap and trade market and it's trading, it has a floor and a ceiling, right? And for most of the market, the price has been very close to the floor. So what this would do is automatically, when the price hits the floor, it would take allowances off the market and thereby raise the price. Same thing when it hits the ceiling. It would add allowances to the market. Why is that so important? By doing that, you stabilize the carbon market, and most of you have probably realized that the last 2 auction cycles, we've been at the bottom of the market. The last one, it was not fully subscribed, and that cost the state about $500 million. So this is a bad thing. Dallas Bertrow, who worked at the IEMAC with California Air Resources Board, did a report with others showing that cost the state $1.5 billion. Okay, I'm going to wrap up here because I know I'm getting at time, but I do want to just quickly talk about rebates. Why would we even talk about rebates? So if the cap and trade program is working, yes, energy prices are going to go up. That is how the program works. Over time, fossil fuel intensive activities, including energies that have fossil fuel, increase, right? And therefore people consume less of them. So my argument is that there have been a number of studies done on this. Michael Wara, Danny Cullenward, and what they've shown is that that carbon price is going to go up no matter what when cap and trade is reauthorized. But if we leave those free allowances for oil companies on the table, the state will have less ability, right, through rebates or through new programming to address those cost impacts. So this is my plea to you. If you care about GGRF, if you care about those local investments in your community, we have to not just protect them, but we have to reform and strengthen the program so that there is a healthy flow of revenue in the future. And I will stop there. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Barry, and thanks to everybody. That was really fantastic. Just what we were hoping for, what we needed. And I want to turn our attention now to an audience Q&A. But before we turn to a few questions that I see posted here in the chat, I just wanted to give our panel an opportunity. You've heard from each other. I think y'all know each other a little bit, but where do you want to respond to what each other has said, or is there anything for which you'd like to fill in additional gaps that you want the audience to be aware of? Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think like the Climate Center's proposals for reform to the system in order to gradually increase revenue are ones that we should be looking at really seriously. SBC supports them almost universally. I think this issue that we need to be cognizant of cost containment for utility and gas prices is true to some extent, but at the same time, gradually increasing that revenue in order to create more program funding is incredibly important. And, at the end of the day, if fossil fuels cost more, maybe that's actually the real price, right? So, I just kind of want to applaud the Climate Center for their proposals and what they've put together, and think that they're something everyone should take a look at.
Thanks, Steve. Anybody else want to respond to the other panelists?
Yeah,
Okay.
I just also want to echo gratitude for some of the things that Barry mentioned. I think there's a lot of myth busting that needs to be done on how these revenues are generated and who's really paying the price. And so we're doing our best to try to, share that out. But yeah, the timelines at which these conversations are moving and kind of the complexity of these topics, it's an ongoing challenge.
Yeah, and maybe I can just jump in there. Thank you, Lolly, and thank you, Steve. And just say one other thing, which is you are already seeing advertisements paid for by the oil industry saying that climate programs are affecting the gas prices and it's going to get really bad. So here's the question to ask them. You've had over $2 billion of subsidies since 2017. How come those weren't passed on to consumers? And they weren't. The evidence is that they actually gouged consumers in that time period. So that's my my bottom line argument for all jurisdictions to think about. We're going to have to contend, and Siva Gunda, vice chair from the California Energy Commission, recently testified that we're going to have some supply issues in California next year, no matter what happens, whether the refinery, the Valero refinery closes or it doesn't close. Right. So the thing is, we're going to have to contend with that. We want to have revenue that is in the control of the legislature and local jurisdictions to address that issue.
Okay, I see Jeff doing lots of hard work here, answering questions in the chat on something called GAN limit. So if you're interested in that, you can refer to that answer. I'm going to try to tackle a couple of questions at the same time here that I think are related. So somebody's asking, can folks talk through and highlight the Prop 4 intersections with this proposed budget on the table? And I think there's a relationship to this question. There's been no funding for TCC in 2 years. I'm hearing Prop 4 and TCC may be linked. My concern is this new budget might impact Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities program, which you all have addressed. for 2025. And so she wants to know how it's going to be affected, given that TCC has no money. Affordable housing and sustainable communities is all that we have left for our project. What is likely to happen for affordable housing and sustainable communities in 2025 and 26? So those two programs, TCC, affordable housing and sustainable communities, and what's the relationship with Prop 4?
So confusing. So my understanding right now is that I responded a little bit on the chat. There are groups that are working to try to preserve the continuous appropriations that's available and has been available for the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities Program for several years. And I think there was a mention in the chat from Steve that there haven't been proposals to reduce or eliminate HSE. With that said, I think there are different ideas among many electeds on how these dollars should be spent, and there have been concerns raised about the nexus with GHG emissions for that program. And so, there's so many programs that are excellent, but there are so many different criteria that people have around how GGRF should be used. And someone might say, oh, I don't see the clearest nexus in terms of the dollar, the cost effectiveness for GHG reductions for that program. And so some people might, not be so excited about ASIC. But with that said, there are groups that are trying to preserve that 20%. And then with TCC, TCC has received Prop 4 dollars, but they are currently reserved for out years. So Greenlining has been working to keep a really close eye on those dollars to make sure that those out years are not disappeared. And also that the advocacy that we've been doing for TCCs for this particular budget year has just been to pull some of those out year dollars into this budget year, for which we have been successful for technical assistance dollars, so that we can ensure the rest of the dollars can get implemented in future years. So that's kind of the story on HSE and TCC at the moment. But of course, we want to advocate for longer term funding for TCC through the GGRF as well, because the Prop 4 dollars really represent only about like 2 rounds of funding, even though it was better than zero.
If I could add one thing to that, the proposed backfill from Prop 4 in the governor's budget and the legislative proposal are 2 specific programs. I can't really get into that here because I need to compare the SB 101 proposal to where we are now, and I haven't had a chance to do that. But if whoever asked about the specific programs wants to drop me an email, I can get that to you by later on this afternoon, because we're cross-referencing all of those today. So
thanks, Steve. So because we're getting close to the end of the formal part of the meeting and about to start our bonus breakout, we're just going to continue to extend this conversation for those of you that could stick around through to 12:15, because there's still more to talk about. But I do want to ask one more question here and give a little plug to something I'm going to put in the chat. If you haven't signed up for the SEEK Forum, please do. We're going to be meeting July 9th and 10th in San Jose, and also come to the SLEEK meeting on July 9th, which is in the morning, 9 to 11, just before the SEEK Forum starts. We're going to be talking a lot about the clean energy transition and what the barriers are to implementing those strategies. So we would love for you to come. Okay, let's go back to the discussion. One thing I want to ask you all before folks begin, if some folks have to go, is can you tell us a little bit about the opportunities that are available to this audience to effectively get involved if they wish to? Don't be
Steve,
shy.
I feel like you had some great points in our prep call that you should uplift.
was that directed to me, Lally? Well, I mean, there are always the coalitions that are working on GGRF, although I have to say, kind of late in the game. Like this is largely going to be decided by, the budget will be decided by Sunday, maybe, as Jeff said, Friday. But in the longer term, I think that, Barry has a coalition organized around reforming the cap and trade program. I know, Lally, you're involved in the EJ and environmental coalition that's working on some of the other kind of disadvantaged community-based investments and the importance of them. Sierra Business Council is deeply involved in the nature-based solutions and wildfire resilience space. And we are standing up a new statewide coalition on wildfire solutions that launched last week, but has been weighing in on this cap and trade discussion. For those of you that are local government members, I really think influencing, for example, the California State Association of Counties and the League of Cities on where they're standing on these issues. I was encouraged to see a pretty kind of forward-looking proposal come out that was signed on to by CSAC, the League of Cities, RCRC, a number of others, the COGS across the state. So like getting the local governments to speak up on this, I think is super important. And I don't know, other opportunities, Barry, that you know of to weigh in this space and be effective?
I always encourage local elected officials to reach out to their legislators on this stuff because your voice really matters. I do want to say that I think we're going to see the GGRF debate continue for quite a while. I think it'll go into the latter part of the session. There will be some things decided in the budget, obviously, that have been put on the table. The 500 million, I think, is going to be decided by the end of this week, one way or another. But I think the kinds of allocations we're talking about, continuing appropriations for these programs that have been here, in addition to some of the new ones that Lolly's either suggesting that we expand or add to the list, those I think we'll see debated for a little while. I don't know, Jeff, if you have a better sense of that timeline, but everybody I've talked to is like, it's uncertain.
Yeah, and to your, I think that's right. And to your earlier point, right, and I guess to Steve's earlier point, while the legislative version of the budget will be passed by the end of the weekend at least, I don't think there is much, if any, confidence that that is the version of the budget that the governor will sign. That is probably, it's a two-party agreement, not a three-party agreement. That said, in terms of the amount of GGRF that goes to cover, they're unlikely in their negotiations to go, they're likely to either pick one of the two or meet in the middle, right? They're not going to, they probably are not going to suddenly say no GGRF money to CAL FIRE, right? It'll be somewhere between $500 million and $1.5 billion, for what it's worth. But yeah, everything after this weekend is uncertain. I think that the governor will sign something by July 1st. He's made a point to do that. It's not the same kind of constitutional deadline as the June 15th, because everybody keeps getting paid, right? If they don't meet the July, except state workers. That's an important distinction. Some state workers don't get paid if they don't. He's made a point to do that. But in terms of then the budget bill juniors, in terms of more trailer bills passing, in terms of the federal government timeline, those are all uncertain. And that's why, among other reasons, there's a lot of talk about a potential special session. And then we didn't even talk about the fact when the transition of the pro tem will take place.
Right.
For those who aren't aware, we will be having a new pro tem, Senator Monique Limon. And so how that will play, the rumor is now, I guess it's probably beyond rumors that will happen after session. So Mike McGuire will go through the budget process, through the second House committee process. But then what about a special session, right? When does that transition happen?
Yeah, and just to add to what Jeff is saying there, Senator Limon is also the one who has led the cap and trade working group in the Senate. And I think the other thing that doesn't seem like it's on the table is a reauthorization of cap and trade through the budget process, which I think is a great thing. That this should have full debate in the legislature. These policies should be vetted. And there's a lot of good, like all the things that I talked about are not decided yet. But if we go the route that the governor had proposed, none of those things would have been on the table. So I do think that who knows what that will look like. Don't have a crystal ball, but there's still plenty of time for local jurisdictions to weigh in on that that debate.
I know Steve had to run. We really appreciate him. This is feeling like the way we're set up pinned on the screen here, like we're the view or something. And I wish we could come back and talk about a lot more things. One thing I do want to mention, and throw back the Learn Opportunity Updates document here in the chat. So on page 3, there's more information you can add to it. You can add, if you're aware of any collaboration opportunities, you can certainly add to that as well. So that you'll see like social media kit, sign-on opportunities with Transform California. That just, align yourself with what makes sense to you. We're not an advocacy organization here. We're really just bringing these issues and information to your attention, so you do with it what you'd like. But I think a lot of those organizations are really advocating for affordable housing and sustainable communities, but there's a lot on the table here to consider. I wondered if our speakers, I want to end on like possible positive note. I mean, we still have Prop 4 in play. It sounds like there's some movement to reach some sort of compromise where we won't lose all continuous and discretionary appropriations out of here. And there's new legislation that's Climate Center and others are promoting, including things like the Climate Superfund Act. Like, give us something on the horizon. What's the trajectory for our funding landscape here in California? Where are some bright spots? Not ready. Maybe Barry, do you want to talk at all about your Climate Superfund Act?
Sure. What I'd say kind of the bright spot is it's kind of like the pearl that comes out of the muck, kind of thing. Because as I said before, we're in really unprecedented times right now in California, partly because we have an anti-science, anti-climate government in Washington, right? So we're going to have to be more innovative, and we're going to have to think about where is the revenue going to come for climate adaptation, for climate mitigation, to deal with climate damages. And there are two bills, one in the Assembly and one in the Senate, on a polluters pays climate superfund. And what I'd say about that is the idea is that you would assess the oil companies, and these are large oil companies, these are like multinationals. They have to have emitted 5 billion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere since 1990. So it's a very few companies. But you assess the amount of damages that they are responsible for in California, and they pay that as a fee. It's done by, would be done by Cal EPA. And this would provide ongoing funding for California to both, as I said, respond to these incredible climate events like the LA fires, as well as continue to do mitigation work at a pace that we really need to, and to adapt in a way that we need to. I've got to tell you, both of those bills are in trouble. They're waiting for a committee hearing, and if they don't get one in another week, they'll probably have to be held until next year. But I think people are taking them seriously because like I said, we have to be creative about revenue right now.
Thanks, Barry. Holly.
I think a bright side is just that we have the opportunity to talk more deeply about reauthorization in general. Just a week or so ago, I saw frantic emails saying, is this going to happen on June 15th? And everyone was, so stressed because that would just be awful to set climate policy that, would take us through 2045, in this budget process that everyone was just so thrown off by. So the fact that, and I think that there are electeds that are receptive to at least talking about the free allowances reforms, talking about offsets, and talking about, the utility rebates for the California climate credit, all of these reforms that we'd like to see to both expand the pie, make the program more stringent, and kind of assist on the affordability front. So I'm hopeful that in the next 6 to 8 weeks that we can continue to have those conversations in a more public way once the budget process is a little bit wrapped up and we can move on to digging into those reform ideas.
Right. And you know, a few months ago was not as clear as it is now that we're very likely to continue cap and trade at all and have a GGRF. So we'll take what we can get, what positive news we can get, right? Jeff, did you have any other thoughts you want before you want to share before we close out here?
Was somebody asked in the chat about the timeline for reauthorization of cap and trade? And I didn't respond, and right, I don't know if they meant what is likely or what is necessary, and that, you know, it's not necessary that it be reauthorized for, I think, 2 more years. But I think it's, at this point, it's very likely that they do reauthorize it this year. And maybe with a longer sunset, maybe with like a 10-year sunset. I think that's what the question was, and I saw Barry nod, so that gave me confidence. But nothing else, but thanks again for getting all this together on the regular, Angie. It's a great group, and you share a lot of good information.
Well, thank you all. We so appreciate you lending your expertise. Thanks for everybody for continuing to come to learn every month, although we will not be around next month because we're going to be in person at the Seek Forum. So we're taking a month off in July of Learn, and then we'll be back together in August. But I'm hoping everybody that's still here, if you can throw some emojis, thank our speakers so much for spending the time to help demystify all of this for us. And I hope they'll continue to keep us abreast as the reauthorization process continues and any opportunities for you all to engage in it. So, so thank you all so much for sticking around. I know we're kind of into our bonus breakout. I am going to now just be quiet for a moment. Anybody who wants to hang around has any quick something to announce or any other topic they'd like to raise, we have 4 minutes left, and we'll do that before we shut it all the way down.
Thanks so much, Angie.
Thanks, Barry. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Lolly.